The ice storm. The piercing shriek of the pink digital alarm clock on the night table was quickly followed by a loud thwack and then silence. The blonde girl that occupied the four-poster bed rolled back over under her black comforter, adorned with red, pink, and purple hearts. For 9 minutes, the girl laid there in silence. When the alarm went off again, Bianca Hayes begrudgingly sat up, rubbing her eyes. With a small stretch and a sigh, Bianca slid to the edge of her bed and let her feet hit the floor. Another stretch, this time standing, pulled her long-sleeved pajama shirt up just enough to reveal her slim, tan waistline and her belly button ring. The shirt, as well as her pants, matched the canopy of her bed, which in turn matched the comforter that had kept her warm throughout the freezing winter's night. Bianca looked out of her bay window that overlooked the quiet street she lived on. All surfaces were covered in the white snow that had fallen overnight, and shined from the gleam of freezing rain that was adding a slippery layer of ice to the top. Hoping for news of a day off or at least a 2-hour delay, Bianca turned on her laptop and checked her school district website. Nothing. Out of all of the districts in the DC metro area, hers was the only one with a regular day of school. With a grumble, the newly 18 senior grabbed a purple towel and walked down the hall to the bathroom, closing the door behind her. Bianca flicked on the light and turned on the water for her shower. She turned to face her full-length mirror and smiled. These were her favorite PJs and they always made her smile when she saw her reflection. She tugged the shirt over her head and let it drop to the floor. Bianca admired her 32B breasts in the mirror. They were perky and sat proudly on her chest, and just as she did most mornings, Bianca gave them a little squeeze. While she was now on the smaller side compared to her girlfriends, she remembered back to the 5th grade when she was the only girl who needed a bra. Bianca always looked fondly upon anything that made her seem older than her friends. At 5'2" and just a hair over 100 pounds, she was often looked at as the baby of the group, though she was older than at least half of her friends. With a sigh, Bianca slid her pajama pants down her slender, toned and tanned legs and kicked them aside. Before her in the mirror stood an 18-year-old girl with what she considered nice boobs, blonde hair cut to her neck, an impressive body, and a saturated goodnight diaper. Bianca cupped the crotch of her diaper, feeling the sagging weight of her wetting. She sighed as she carefully tore the nighttime garment from her waist, wrapped it into a ball, and dropped it into the large trash can next to the toilet. At least this one didn't leak, Bianca mused as she stepped into the shower. Bianca had been a bedwetter her entire life. It was a hereditary thing, an unfortunate trait shared by her parents as children. Her father had outgrown it early on in junior high, her mother in her freshman year of high school. Yet Bianca, who has never had a dry night in her life, was still wetting on a nightly basis at 18. Having tried every remedy available, eventually the Hayes family decided to just wait it out. Bianca's small stature allowed her to use goodnights most of the time, but every so often, after a few leaky nights, she'd have to resign to using an extra large baby diaper. The leaky wettings increased a little over 3 years ago, right after Bianca's father was killed in a car accident. Bianca was aware of the psychological connection between the two, but she hoped that as time passed, the wettings would reduce. Only 3 people beyond Bianca and her mother knew about her problem. Growing up, her next-door neighbor Brandon, who was 2 years older, shared the same problem. It was common for the two to have sleepovers up until Bianca's early budding breasts led to their parents ending any chance of sleepovers. Bianca hadn't seen much of Brandon since he started college, even though he still lived next door. But Brandon probably assumed that she eventually grew out of the bedwetting like he did when he was 11. The only people who knew she still peed the bed each night were her 2 closest girlfriends, Stacy and Jessie. As a high school freshman, Bianca confided her secret to the two before a sleepover, and was shocked and flattered when the girls joined her in wearing goodnights for that night, a tradition they would continue for most sleepovers. Bianca snapped out of her daydream, realizing that she had spent more time in the shower than planned. She ran her hand across her pelvic area where her pubic hair was growing back in. Bianca tried to keep it smooth, making for an easier cleanup after wetting, but figured she could do that and wash her hair tomorrow morning. She did notice the beginnings of a rash, and she made a note to use some cream before bed that night. Bianca stepped out of the shower, toweled off and began applying moisturizer. She wrapped herself in a bathrobe and returned to her room. Looking at her alarm clock, she saw how much time she had wasted in the shower. She only had 15 minutes to get ready and get outside for the bus. She made quick work of drying her hair, and was pleased with her relatively short style. When her hair was longer, it took forever to dry. Once her hair dryer was off, she heard a scraping noise outside. She glanced out of the window and saw Brandon in his driveway next door, fighting to get the ice off of his car. Bianca went over to her bureau and opened the top drawer. She pulled out a simple hot pink bra and a baby blue pair of Hello Kitty panties. After putting her undergarments on, she covered them with a pair of jeans and baby blue sweater that clung nicely in all the right places. After finding matching socks and pulling on her cute black boots, Bianca threw on a jacket and grabbed her backpack, and made her way out to the bus stop. Next door, Brandon was scarfing down a bagel as he gathered his things. As he shuffled out the door, he saw Bianca turning the corner toward the bus stop. He thought about how long it had been since they had hung out, and how he'd have to make a better effort at it soon. Brandon slid into the driver's seat of his 1997 Camry and guided it carefully out of the driveway. All of his professors cancelled class, save for one, and it figured it would be his 8:30. The wheels of the Camry spun out as he tried driving forward down the street. Cursing, Brandon tried again, and inched his way toward the corner. He waited for the school bus to pass, then turned right to follow it. Brandon was following the bus and scanning the dial for a decent morning show when he heard the squeal of brakes. He jerked his head up in time to see a car veer from the other side of the road in front of the bus, having lost control on the ice. Brandon slammed on his brakes, skidding to a stop safely. The bus was able to avoid the car, but the swerve combined with the icy conditions sent the big yellow vehicle into a ditch on the side of the road. Brandon's mouth was agape as the bus seemingly tipped over in slow motion. The crashing sound of the bus landing on its side snapped Brandon out of his trance. Brandon got out of the car and ran over to the bus. He jerked open the emergency exit door on the back and surveyed the scene. This was the first stop, so there were only 8 kids on board. Brandon made his way through the bus, walking on what normally was the side of the right-hand row of seats. He was amazed that the kids only seemed to have minor cuts and bruises. Thanks to the new law that required school buses to have seat belts, most of the kids were buckled safely to the seats. On the driver's side of the bus, Brandon and a boy in a letterman's jacket were helping a few kids who were dongaying from seatbelts out of the bus. The 2 students on the right side of the bus had the most injuries, but even they were able to walk out of the bus. Brandon noticed the driver trying to help a student at the front of the bus and went over to them. "She doesn't want to move," the visibly shaken driver exclaimed as she noticed Brandon. Brandon saw Bianca, huddled atop a broken window on the right side crying. "I know her, I'll take care of her." "Make sure the others are all okay," Brandon told the driver as he climbed down into the seat that normally was behind the one where Bianca was. "B, it's me, Bran, are you all right?" Brandon asked. Bianca just shuddered and continued quietly crying. "Here, give me your hand, I'll help you out of here," Brandon assured her. Bianca extended her hand and allowed Brandon to help her out. Brandon was about to help her climb onto the seats to exit when he noticed her pants. A large wet spot covered her crotch and butt, with streams running down each leg. When Bianca followed Brandon's gaze down and noticed, she began crying harder. She didn't even realize she had peed her pants. "SSHHH, B, it's okay, you're just shaken up," Brandon began reassuringly as he looked around the bus. "Here." Brandon grabbed the fire blanket from the first aid box above the windshield and wrapped it around her. He then carefully navigated Bianca across the seats and out of the overturned bus. They could already hear the ambulance and police sirens rushing toward the site. When the emergency crews arrived and surveyed the scene, Bianca clung to Brandon's side, still quietly crying. With none of the kids seriously injured and only one needing to go to the hospital, the EMTs agreed to let Brandon take his friend home, on the condition that he watched over her and would bring her in if anything came up. Brandon helped Bianca into the passenger seat and walked around the car and got in. He restarted the motor and glanced over at his friend. Your seatbelt," Brandon pointed out. When he got no response from her, he reached over and buckled her in. The entire drive home, Brandon constantly reassured her that everything was going to be all right, that she was safe, and that the scary part was over. Brandon offered the shaking girl his water bottle, which she quickly downed, helping ease her sobs. He pulled his car into the Hayes driveway, unbuckled Bianca's seatbelt, and guided her into the house. Brandon helped Bianca up to her room, where he took the blanket from her shoulders. She shivered a bit, adjusting to the change in temperature. "Do you want to get cleaned up?" Brandon asked carefully. Bianca nodded. Brandon stood for a moment, then went to grab her bath towel from the hook on the door. It was still damp. This one's still kinda wet." "Where are there more towels?" Brandon inquired. "In there," Bianca said, pointing at the trunk at the foot of her bed. Brandon's relief that Bianca finally said something was quickly replaced with shock when he opened the trunk. Next to the towels and washcloths was a package of goodnights, a package of diapers, a tube of rash cream, powder, and a tub of baby wipes. I am such a baby," Bianca stammered. No, it's cool, don't worry about it," Brandon tried to play it off. "Here's a fresh towel, why don't you get a shower and then get some rest?" But you can't leave me alone." "The EMT said so." Bianca yelled out, clearly terrified at the thought of being alone. "What should I do?" Brandon asked, trying not to upset her any further. Can you sit with Emmy while I take a bath?" Bianca quietly asked. Brandon nodded and led her into the bathroom. He prepared the bath, running the warm water and adding some bubble bath that was on the ledge. He turned to Bianca, who, much to his surprise, had already removed her top. Brandon tore his eyes away from the hot pink bra that contained her breasts to see that Bianca was struggling to unbutton her jeans with her very shaky hands. After a moment, she collapsed the floor and began crying again. Brandon leaned down and helped her back to her feet. Can you help me?" Bianca pleaded. Brandon nodded. He stood in front of Bianca and began undoing the 5 buttons that trailed down the front of her pants. He tried to ignore the fact that he was taking off a beautiful girl's pants and that his arms bumped into her boobs each time he undid a button. Looking to Bianca for reassurance, he carefully slid the wet pants down her legs. When he knelt down to help her step out of the jeans, Brandon was eye level with her crotch. Her soaked panties did little to hide her lips, and Brandon was embarrassed as he felt his penis begin to stir. "Should I, get the rest?" Brandon asked meekly. Again, Bianca just nodded. Brandon carefully unlatched her bra and let it fall to the floor. He did his best to avert his eyes as he peeled off her soaking wet panties, but couldn't help but look when he stood up. Brandon quickly helped his gorgeous, nude neighbor into the tub, hoping that she didn't notice the blooge in his own jeans. After a few moments of Bianca just sitting there, Brandon sat on the toilet. While the bubbles hid Bianca's most intimate area from his view, he could still see her breasts. Does anything hurt?" Brandon asked awkwardly. "Just my pride," Bianca joked meekly. "And my neck is sore." "Massage?" Brandon offered. Bianca nodded and he leaned over, rubbing her neck and shoulders. "Bran, I'm such a big baby, I'm so sorry," Bianca began. "It's just, I don't know, being in an accident is about the scariest thing I can think of. Thank you so much for helping me." "Anytime," Brandon responded. "I can't believe I peed my pants," Bianca blushed, "and now you've seen me naked." "Well, no need to apologize for that part," Brandon answered, blushing, But don't worry about peeing yourself, it happens to people in situations like that all of the time. The massage continued in silence for a few minutes until Brandon saw Bianca's eyelids getting heavier. Looks like you could use some rest, Brandon suggested. Yeah, I guess, Bianca agreed. Bianca pulled the plug on the tub and stood up. Brandon's jaw nearly hit the floor as she used a cup of water to rinse the lingering bubbles from her body. Brandon wordlessly handed Bianca her towel. She dried off a bit, and then wrapped it around her body, covering her breasts and mostly hairless mound. As she stepped out of the tub, she slipped, and Brandon managed to catch her. Geez, B, you're shaking like a leaf, Brandon observed. Brandon could see the fear from the accident lingering in Bianca's eyes. He carefully led her back to her room. He picked up her pajamas from the floor and tossed them onto the bed. He walked back into the bathroom and retrieved her bra, bringing it back down the hall to her bedroom, where he found Bianca crying. B, what's wrong? Brandon asked, rushing over to her. I don't know, she sobbed, you left and I just started crying again. Hey, it's okay, Brandon said, rubbing her back, I'm here, you're okay. Brandon went to her bureau, and made the correct guess that he would find underwear in the top drawer. He pulled out a plain pair of pink panties and tried to hand them to Bianca along with the bra. Here, why don't you get dressed and take a nap? He offered, noticing her hands were still shaking. Can you get it or do you need help with the bra again? I don't wear bras to sleep, Bianca replied. Okay, Brandon replied, tossing the bra aside and offering Bianca the panties. I can't wear those either, Bianca quietly reminded Brandon, blushing. After a moment of awkward silence, she continued. Can you get me a good night out of the trunk? Brandon nodded. He knelt in front of the trunk and lifted the lid. He was again greeted by the sight of protective garments and cleaning supplies. Brandon picked up a purple goodnight decorated with hearts and butterflies. He held it out to Bianca, and instead of taking it from him, she stepped into it. Brandon slid it up Bianca's legs and under her towel, catching a quick glimpse of her pubic area before the garment was in place. While still shaky, Bianca seemed to regain her composure a bit as she dropped the towel. So, you still wet the bed, huh? Brandon asked. Yes. It's humiliating, Bianca replied as she pulled on her pajama pants, her breasts out in the open for Brandon to ogle. I have still never woken up dry, it sucks. Yeah, I remember the feeling, Brandon responded knowingly. Bianca pulled on her pajama shirt and climbed into bed, pulling her comforter over herself. She indicated to a bin bag chair next to the bed. Would you mind staying with me while I sleep? Bianca asked. Yeah, sure, no problem, Brandon replied. Thanks, Bran, you're the best, Bianca yawned and before long, was drifting off to sleep. About 15 minutes into Bianca's nap, Brandon realized he hadn't had the chance to call Mrs. Hayes and fill her in on what had happened. He pulled out his cell and luckily Till had her number in it. Brandon explained the whole situation, sans nudity, to Mrs. Hayes, reassuring her that Bianca was okay. Unfortunately, it turned out that Mrs. Hayes was on a business trip in New York that was due to end that day, but due to the storm she was stuck up there for at least one extra day. Brandon promised to stay with Bianca until Mrs. Hayes was able to return. A few moments after the phone call ended, Brandon, himself exhausted from the eventful morning, began to drift off to sleep as well. The term blood-curdling scream may be overused, but Brandon realized what it meant as he leapt from the bin bag chair, his slumber interrupted by the terrifying noises coming from Bianca's bed. He rushed over to Bianca, who was thrashing about wildly and screaming in response to a nightmare she was having. Bianca! Wake up! Brandon hollered, shaking his friend awake. Bianca looked around the room through tear-filled eyes, terrified by her dream. She saw Brandon and clung to him immediately, sobbing. I dreamed that there was another accident, and my dad was there and he died and mom died and why you died and Bianca's sobs overwhelmed her ability to continue describing the dream. B, it's okay, you're safe at home, I'm here, and I'll be here until your mom gets home tomorrow, okay? Brandon assured Bianca. Here, I'm going to run and get you a drink, I'll be right back. Brandon dashed down to the kitchen, grabbed a glass, filled it with water, and rushed back up the stairs, taking them two at a time. He found Bianca sitting, still mostly covered by her comforter. He handed her the glass and she began to drink. Jesus, B, you're breaking into a sweat, hang on a sec. Brandon ran into the bathroom, wet a washcloth, and returned to Bianca's room. Brandon held the cloth to Bianca's head. He took the empty glass from her and gently laid her back down on the bed. How do you feel? Brandon inquired. Hot, Bianca responded. Brandon pulled the comforter off of Bianca and was surprised to see a large wet spot on the purple sheet beneath Bianca's rear. B. What? I think your goodnight leaked a little. Bianca again sat up and looked down at herself. With a heavy sigh she put her head in her hands. What the hell is wrong with me? Bianca yelled out. B, relax. You've had an extremely rough day, Brandon calmly responded. Bianca just sighed as Brandon helped her out of bed. Listen, get out of your wet things and I'll start a load of laundry with all of this stuff and the stuff from earlier. Bran, you don't have to do this, Bianca replied. This is so embarrassing. It's okay, B, I'm glad to help, Brandon answered. Thanks, Bianca said gratefully. Bianca slid the pajama pants off of her legs as Brandon stripped the bed. He gathered up her wet things from her room and bathroom, and took them downstairs to wash. Bianca removed her pajama top and tossed it on the floor. She tore the sides of her wet goodnight and let it drop to the floor. Bianca opened up her trunk and cleaned up with some wipes, which she tossed into the open goodnight. Finally, she rubbed some diaper cream on the rash she noticed earlier that morning, hoping that it wouldn't get worse from all of the times she had peed that day. Bianca took the panties Brandon had taken out earlier and held them in her hand. She looked at her trunk, and then back at the panties. Ultimately, she decided to return the panties to the top drawer and opted to pull a diaper with Elmo on it from her trunk. Bianca set the diaper on the floor and sat on it as Brandon walked in. Oh. Sorry. I thought you'd be done, Brandon blushed as he averted his eyes. Well, you've really seen it all at this point, Bianca said with a sigh. So you wear diapers now? Brandon asked, turning back around. Only when I have a leak like that with the goodnights, Bianca began. Bran. Can you help me out? It's never as tight when you do it yourself. Yeah, sure, Brandon answered, kneeling between Bianca's legs. What exactly do I do? Push this middle part down on my stomach, then bring the tapes around as tight as you can, Bianca directed as Brandon followed her steps. Perfect, thanks. Yeah, sure. Brandon helped Bianca to her feet. He noticed a slight waddle in her walk as she went to her dresser and selected an oversized t-shirt. She pulled it over her head, obstructing her breasts from his view. They stood for a moment, caught in another awkward silence. Listen, I'm kinda afraid to go back to sleep right now, Bianca began meekly. Would it be alright if we went downstairs and put on a movie or something? Brandon agreed. They went downstairs and as Bianca selected a movie, Brandon popped some popcorn and got them each a Coke. He returned to the living room with the snack to find that Bianca had selected Anchorman. As the two settled on the couch to watch the comedy and try to forget the day's trauma, they were each thinking about what they had experienced. Bianca marveled first at how lucky she was to survive such a crash without major injury, and second how lucky was to have a friend so caring as Brandon. She curled up close to him and laid her head on his chest, allowing him to wrap an arm around her shoulders. Brandon was having a myriad of thoughts racing through his head. He had been the hero, something he'd always fantasized about. Furthermore, he'd seen his longtime best friend Bianca naked, something he'd been fantasizing about for quite some time as well. Brandon glanced down at Bianca and noticed her diaper peeking out from beneath the hem of her shirt, and he could feel the blood begin to rush toward his groin. Brandon wasn't sure why seeing Bianca in a diaper was a turn-on, but it was. For the first time that day, Bianca noticed the bulge forming in Brandon's jeans and, also for the first time that day, smiled. Though both Brandon and Bianca were wondering the day's events had meant for their relationship, they both knew there would be another more appropriate time to address that. In the meantime, they pushed those thoughts aside and enjoyed the movie and the momentary escape it provided from an eventful and frightening day that all started with an ice storm. Isolated. They gave me this journal so I could practice my writing. That's what the note said on it. I never actually see them. I guess it's working because I'm doing it, but honestly it's only because I'm tired of reading all the books. That's all I ever do. I don't like this new place. It's got a big mirror in the main room that reflects everything. I guess it's supposed to be an illusion or something, like the room is bigger. This is the third move this year. I have no idea why. Then again, I never know what's going on because I'm stuck here. The only good news is they switched back to the old thicker garments. Those new ones were so uncomfortable and impractical. I want to get out of here. My entire world has always been a room. I want more. I want out. I can't say this out loud though, so I'm writing it here. If I did, they wouldn't be happy. The old garments are so much nicer. Never have trouble with them holding. I can't believe that's all I have to write about. Maybe more next time. For now, some sleep. I got a few new books. When I woke up, they were laying on the center table. I spent the whole morning reading them, planning on rereading tomorrow or maybe this afternoon. I haven't decided. Some of them had the covers ripped off, and like the others, there was a black bar on the one with covers that was blacking out some text or something under the title. They switched back to the thin garments again, so I'm saving the older ones for when I'm busy and don't want to be distracted. One of the lights went out today, so it's a little darker in here than usual, still bright enough to read and write. I reread the books again. It's so nice to have some fresh to do. I wish they'd give me more books. One of the books mentioned something called a television. I'd never heard of it, so I looked up in the big book. Some kind of made-up box that shows a moving picture. I wish I had one of those. It'd be a nice change of pace from the books. Fixed the light today. There was a new bulb on the table when I woke up. I have no idea how these things get in here, but for some reason it kind of unnerves me. There was also a pack of the old garments next to the bulb. Don't think they've switched back though, because they resupplied the changing room with new ones, so I guess I'll be saving these too. Finally found you. Could have sworn I left you on the table a few days ago before I went to bed. Oh well, not that it matter now. Not much has changed. No new books and still the new garments. I woke up in the night. I don't know why. Maybe it was because my garment was wet, but there is something weird going on with the mirror. It was glowing kind of. I want to cover it up, but the bed sheets are too small. I want out of here. There was some new food on the table this morning, really sweet tasting. I wish I could get more of it. I saved a little bit for tomorrow. There was also some more of the bubbling drink. I wore an old garment when I drank it because it goes through me quick and I didn't want to risk wearing a new one. I stayed up a little later last night to see if the mirror glowed again. It didn't. Guess I'm just paranoid. New book. There was a new word on this book that hadn't seen before: isolation. I don't know what it means, so I tried to find it in the old book, but it wasn't in there. Maybe it's just some made-up word, but the way it was used, it is making me think. I really want to learn the new word. I've reread the book a few times. I even wore an old garment so I wouldn't need a break. It bothers me that I don't know what it means. The book is gone. I've looked absolutely everywhere and it's like it vanished. I remember reading it until I couldn't keep my eyes open, then I laid it on the bed table. When I woke up it was gone. I'm probably going to end up spending most of the day looking for it. The book is gone, but I'm not done thinking about the word. I've practically dedicated myself to looking for any words like this one in the other books. I have enough old garments to last me for a while. The old garments are gone. At first I thought I had misplaced them with the new ones, but they're gone. I'm still searching through the books, but it's a lot more annoying having to take breaks to switch garments so often. The search isn't proving fruitful. I can hardly even find a word similar to the one in the book. I'm starting to lose hope. I'm scared. I woke up in the middle of the night again. The first thing I noticed was that the mirror was glowing again, the second was something else. I don't know what happened, but there was something in the room. I didn't see it, but I heard something drop, and when I tried to turn on the lights they wouldn't work. Then I heard a slam and the light came on a second later. There was a new book on the table. I'm almost too scared to read it. I want out of here. I'm done looking for the word. I have a bigger problem. I want out, and I'm going to get out. This isn't the first time I've tried and probably won't be the last, but I have to. This place is new, maybe I can find a way. No progress on getting out, this place is sealed up tight. Maybe I'm wasting my time. Isolate, to be or remain alone from others. That's what it means. I read the book today. About halfway through I found a note. It wasn't the handwriting like the books and other notes, it was more curvy like mine. It had the definition just like it would be in the old book. The note said I should put my journal under my pillow, and on the back it said, "I'm going to get you out, just act normal." Wanted to scream. But I can't, according to the note, act normal. I don't want to mess up, so writing this is the only way I can even begin to let some of this out. I can't believe it. I don't when or how, but I'm getting out. I put the book on the shelf and I have to keep myself from going over to read the note again and again. I'm in absolute shock. I can't believe this is happening. It's been a few days since I got the note, nothing has happened so far. I keep thinking about that word though, isolate or isolation, whichever, and it's me. Was I not supposed to know that? It must be why they took the book away. I don't understand why they would try to hide that from me. None of this makes sense, but I don't want to be isolated anymore. I want out. I hope it happens soon. The inheritance. What the hell are you talking about? Maggie looked up at the man in an expensive-looking suit and tie standing next to her table. He looked awkwardly out of place among the casually dressed students in the university cafeteria. "Your name is Maggie, is it not?" the stranger repeated. "Yeah, and..." The man sighed. "Look, this is a bit odd, but this is you, isn't it?" He pulled out a folded piece of paper from his jacket, unfolded it and put it down on the table next to Maggie's half-finished sandwich. It was a pencil sketch of her. "Damn, that's you," Christopher said. He was sitting across the table from Maggie. Maggie had to admit that the sketch looked remarkably like her. "Okay," she said, "that's me. And if you have a modeling offer or something like that, take a hike." Christopher was still looking at the sketch. "This is really good," he said. "When did you pose for it?" "She didn't," the stranger said dryly. "This sketch is more than 20 years old." "Okay," Maggie said cautiously, "I'm interested." Keep going. The stranger sat down. I suppose introductions are in order. My name is Rhett Moreau and I work for the law firm of Mathis and Mayhew. So you're a lawyer? Mr. Moreau nodded. Anne. Maggie made a beckoning gesture. Our firm mostly handle estate law. And, if you pass certain tests, you may be the heir to the remaining estate of Dr. Charlie Stefanova. But what has that got to do with a 20-year-old sketch of me? Mr. Moreau adjusted his tie before continuing. Dr. Stefanova's will included strict instructions that we were to wait until this year before trying to find you. All we had to work with was this sketch and your first name. Well, that and the control questions. Maggie was confused. I don't know anybody called Charlie Stefanova. I've never even heard of the guy. Dr. Stefanova was a woman. She insisted on Charlie although her given name was Charlotte. Charlotte? Maggie's head snapped up. Do you have a picture of her? She asked urgently. Certainly, Mr. Moreau said. He fiddled with his phone for a few moments before handing it to Maggie. On the screen was a picture of a woman in her late 60s. Her grey hair would have made Albert Einstein's hair look neat. Do you have a picture of her when she was younger? Like in her 20s or 30s? Sorry, no, Mr. Moreau said. No worries, Christopher said, his phone already out. Stefanova with an F or a PH? F. Google to the rescue, he announced and showed Maggie. The woman in the picture was without a doubt the same Charlotte Maggie had met only a couple of weeks earlier, albeit dressed quite differently. She was wearing a white lab coat and seemed to be giving some kind of lecture. It worked, Maggie whispered. You made it. Excuse me. Mr. Moreau looked at her. Oh, nothing, Maggie said. You said something about additional tests. Well, they're more like control questions given to us by Dr. Stefanova. Bear in mind that she was quite eccentric and the questions don't really make any sense, but her will states quite clearly that unless you answer them correctly you get nothing. So no pressure then, Maggie quipped. Mr. Moreau just stared at her with a blank expression. Never mind. What are the questions? Like I said, these questions doesn't really make any sense. Mr. Moreau tapped his phone a few times. Okay, Dr. Stefanova's first question is, what color was the dress I wore when you last saw me? Pale yellow, Maggie said quickly. Mr. Moreau raised an eyebrow, but continued. Number 2, which flower will I never draw again? Maggie had a mental flash of the stack of Charlotte's drawings she had found. She shook her head to clear it. Bluebells. Interesting, Mr. Moreau said cryptically. And last, who did we leave behind? Maggie swallowed. Maria and Jacob, she said quietly. Leaving them behind when Charlotte, Tommy and herself had weighed heavily on her. Mr. Moreau rose and put away his phone. I have to check your answers with the sealed documents we have from Dr. Stefanova, but if they're correct, you'll be hearing from us. He turned and left before Maggie had a chance to say anything. Well, that was weird, Christopher said when Mr. Moreau was gone. So how do you know her? I don't. Not really anyway. Look, it's complicated. Maggie didn't really want to tell Christopher about how she had met Charlotte. Partly because it had led her to need diapers at night for almost a week, but also because saying it out loud would make it sound even more insane than it already seemed in her mind. So what did you find out about her? Maggie pointed to Christopher's phone. Let's see, he said and he scrolled down. Born in 1947. 3 PhDs, Physics, Biomechanical Engineering and Computer Engineering. She was one of those annoying child prodigies who is good at almost everything. Finished high school at 11. Apparently she had some kind of mental breakdown at Woodstock in '69 when she was 22. It says something about severe mental regression due to a bad acid trip. Apparently it took her years to recover. After that, she worked mostly on some of the more out there things. What do you mean out there? Science fiction-y, quantum physics stuff like parallel universes, time travel, and artificial intelligence. Obviously, she didn't make any front-page advances. When did she die? Maggie felt a strange mix of feelings. Relief that Charlotte and probably also Tommy got back to their place in time, but also guilt and shame at having left Maria and Jacob behind when they escaped. It doesn't say. She just disappeared in 2010. Disappeared? That's what it says here. Christopher pointed to the screen of his phone. I guess she must have been declared dead. I mean, if they're looking up people in her will. I guess, Maggie said absent-mindedly. So how did you end up in her will? No way it's some kind of scholarship. Not with your grades. Look who's talking. Your grades are even worse than mine. Yeah, and that's why you love me, he said with a grin. But seriously, why would you be in the will of a mad scientist? Maggie sighed. It's kinda complicated. Yeah, you keep saying that. Look, can't this wait until I actually know if I inherit anything? The guy said he had to check to see if the answers were right. Oh come on, you didn't sound like you were guessing. You knew the answers. I said I didn't want to talk about it, Maggie snapped, suddenly feeling very annoyed with Christopher's curiosity. Fine. Christopher held up his hands. Geez, I was just curious. The rest of the lunch passed in an awkward silence. It was almost 2 weeks before Maggie heard back from the lawyers. She came home after a particularly hectic day to find an official-looking envelope in her mailbox. Despite the temptation to rip it open right there, Maggie left the envelope on the kitchen table while she made dinner. While the soup simmered, Maggie could no longer resist. She ripped the envelope open and extracted the single sheet of paper within. Despite the legalese, the letter was fairly straightforward. The lawyers said that her answers to the control questions were correct and that they wanted to meet with her to finalize matters. Maggie set a reminder on her phone to call them the next day before returning her attention to the soup. The meeting was more of a formality than anything else. The lawyers had Maggie sign some papers and then handed her a set of keys and a sealed envelope. They told her that Charlotte had left Maggie her house on the outskirts of town, with all its contents. Maggie wondered what they meant by that phrase and really hoped it didn't mean that it looked like the houses on those reality shows about compulsive hoarders. That thought almost made her miss the condition that Charlotte had set down. If Maggie wanted the house, she had to live there. Charlotte had also left her some money. Not a fortune, but enough for Maggie to finish her education with only one extra job. The house, Maggie asked the bored-looking lawyer she was meeting with, has it just been left all these years? Well, Dr. Stefanova's estate covered a cleaning and maintenance service and the basic utilities are up and running so you could theoretically move in already tomorrow. Of course, things like cable and internet have been disconnected so those might take a couple of days to get reactivated. The will stipulated you have to move in within 1 month and you have to live there for at least 1 year. Maggie nodded. Anything else I should know? Not really. Dr. Stefanova may have left you more information in that letter. The lawyer nodded towards the envelope. We will be checking that you're in compliance with the conditions of the will. But unless you have any other questions, our business is concluded. 60-year-old Charlotte's face filled the screen. Okay, this feels a little weird, she said. But if you're watching this, I've been declared dead. I'm guessing you have quite a few questions, so I'll try to give you some answers. First of all, how did I find you? Well, in 1996 I managed to track down Tommy. He was taken in 1990, by the way. Charlotte held up a photo. Despite the sickly appearance of the man in the picture, Maggie recognized Tommy. By the time I tracked him down, he was already terminally ill. He passed away a year later. But he knew enough that we could figure out you were from 2016 or 17. That, combined with your name and picture, Charlotte held up the sketch Mr. Morrow had shown Maggie, was obviously enough to find you. The image of Charlotte went unfocused as she leaned closer. When the camera had refocused, she held up the 2 thumb drives that Maggie now had. Now, what I want you to do is to leave the second flash drive alone for now. When you're settled in your new house, go down to the basement. The camera shifted to show a freezer in a dimly lit room. Under the floorboards next to the freezer is my laptop. You need to plug the second drive into that. That should give you all the answers you need. The screen went blank. Maggie stared at the screen. She replayed the file, looking for hidden clues, nothing. Maggie pulled out the flash drive and inserted the other one, but all she got was an error message saying that the drive had an unknown file system and couldn't be read. She closed the laptop and looked around her tiny flat. Doing a quick inventory, she figured she would only need a couple of big boxes in addition to her suitcase to pack up all her belongings. If the house really was okay, she could easily move in before the end of the month. The following weekend, Maggie enlisted Christopher's help and headed for the house. It took them more than an hour to get there. When they said it was on the outskirts of town, they forgot to mention that it was in the middle of the fucking forest, Christopher said as they finally turned off from the main road and drove down a gravel road between the trees. At least it'll be nice and quiet, Maggie said. Yeah. Nobody'll hear you scream when the insane axe murderer comes over. The nearest neighbor is what, half a kilometer away? Perfect for a mad scientist. Charlotte wasn't mad, Maggie said defensively. How do you know? You said you didn't know her. Maggie hesitated. Look, she just wouldn't be. We'll see. As they reached the 2-story house at the end of the road, a couple of floodlights snapped on and turned to shine directly on the car, following it the last few meters as it stopped. Yeah, course that's not creepy at all. Christopher turned off the engine. I bet there's a lab with body parts in jars in the basement. Maggie just punched him in the arm before getting out of the car and marching up the stairs to the front door. The front door opened without the creaking hinges that Maggie half expected. Inside was a narrow hallway with stairs up on the right. The air smelled faintly of soap. Maggie stepped inside and switched on the lights. So, any mechanical horrors? Maggie jumped as Christopher came up behind her. She looked around. To her right, at the bottom of the stairs, was what looked like a closet, while on her left was a door with a small, red and white painted heart. She peeked inside and saw a small bathroom. Oh, you have to see this, Christopher called from further down the hallway. Maggie walked past what had to be the basement door to find Christopher in the kitchen. It was huge. There was a massive, steel fridge in one corner, a big gas stove, dishwasher, and enough cupboards and counter space to make a small restaurant feel jealous. Christopher was sitting on the edge of a dining table made from thick, smooth planks. It looked completely out of place in the otherwise high-tech kitchen. Can you believe the size of this place? It's almost as big as your entire apartment. Millimeter, Maggie said, running her hand over the smooth wood. The table seemed eerily familiar, but she couldn't place it. Next, they checked out the living room next to the kitchen. The walls were almost entirely covered with bookshelves. The books were everything from dense tomes on advanced physics to science fiction paperbacks. There were even a couple of comic books here and there. The only other furniture was a big, slightly worn sofa in one corner and a couple of easy chairs next to a small coffee table. Christopher opened a pair of cabinet doors, almost causing a small avalanche. Well, she didn't just read books. Here's a fat screen TV. He stepped aside to reveal an old TV set and a DVD player inside the cabinet. Maggie groaned at his pun and walked back out to the hallway. There was only 2 bedrooms and a large bathroom upstairs. They were all as mundane as the ground floor. You know how they always say he seemed so normal when they catch a serial killer with soup bowls made of skulls and bags of human jerky in their pantry? Christopher said as he opened the door under the stairs. ready to descend into madness and see what kind of horror show you've inherited. Maggie blew a raspberry at him and walked down the stairs. Oh my God, Maggie exclaimed when she reached the bottom of the stairs. What? Christopher came running down the stairs. You're such a sucker, Maggie said and shook her head. The basement seemed perfectly normal too. There were shelves holding dusty cardboard boxes, a workbench and some tools along one of the walls and a big freezer under the stairs. In one corner was a pair of skis. Through an open door, Maggie could see the laundry room with a washing machine and a dryer. She had to stop herself from getting Charlotte's laptop right away. Finding the answers she wanted would just lead to more questions from Christopher. She needed to figure out how much of the truth she could tell him. Maggie walked across the room and looked nonchalantly through the door to the laundry room. Yeah, Chris. I don't think there's a hidden sex dungeon here. Fine, but it's still creepy, he said defensively. I don't know, I like it. I mean, it's nice and quiet. Nice and quiet? More like completely isolated. You're going to end up with stacks of papers all saying all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy over and over. Pfft. Maggie walked past Christopher and up the stairs. Please don't tell me you're seriously considering moving here, Christopher called after her. It's either that or lose it. I have to move in within a month and stay here for a year. It was in the will. Okay, but how are you going to get to school? I mean, it's not like there's a lot of buses here, and there's no way I'm picking you up every day. You could stay here too, Maggie suggested. I don't mean we move in together. There are 2 bedrooms here, after all, she quickly added. You're kidding, right? I like you and all, but there isn't a pizza place for miles. Maggie knew that pizza wasn't Christopher's problem. Living this far away from the city would severely cramp his dating style. And having Maggie as a not-quite roommate probably wouldn't help. Yeah, I guess, she conceded. They walked outside and Maggie locked the front door. At least you're not going to have to worry about buses, Christopher shouted. He was standing in the doorway of the shed next to the driveway. Maggie walked over and looked inside. It was a car, at least technically. It looked like the unholy offspring of a quad bike and a Mini Cooper. And it was Granny Smith apple green. At least you won't get any tickets in that thing, Christopher said. The cops'll be too busy laughing to stop you. I can see why they thought Dr. Stefanova was nuts. Oh, shut up. For some reason, Maggie still felt she had to protect Charlotte even if it was almost 50 years since she had been the scared little kid Maggie had met. Even so, she had to admit it was an ugly car. After making sure the car started, they checked out the garden behind the house. To be honest, it was less of a garden and more of a tiny, mossy lawn with a single row of strawberry plants along the wall of the house. Satisfied that she had checked out the house and that it was livable, Maggie and Christopher got back in the car and headed back to the city. You're moving already. Christopher looked at Maggie as if she had grown an extra head. What about your place? One word, sublet. Maggie grinned. She would actually make money on that arrangement. Look, you don't have to help. Anita and that creepy, Aryan-looking boyfriend of hers, what's his name? Maximilian, Christopher helped. Yeah, Maximum. Anita borrowed a van from work so we can get everything moved in one go. Maggie knew that would get him on board. She knew Christopher was convinced that Max wanted to get Maggie to join him and Anita in a threesome, and he was not going to let that happen. Of course, Maggie continued, it's not like we're a couple, so if you have other plans. Oh come on, what kind of friend would I be if I didn't help? Christopher said. 3 days later, Maggie's meager belongings were all packed into 5 big boxes in the back of Anita's van. Max, looking disturbingly like a grown-up version of Draco Malfoy from the Harry Potter movies, leaned against the side of the van, watching as Maggie and Christopher struggled with Maggie's big suitcase. It was too big to fit anywhere except in the backseat of Christopher's tiny car. Stop staring. Max got a backhanded slap on his arm from Anita and reluctantly turned to get in the car. Then they were off. A few hours later they were all gathered around the coffee table in Maggie's new living room, eating the traditional "we helped you move so now we get pizza." Max raised his beer bottle. "Here's to Dr. Charlie for leaving such a nice little place to you, Maggie." "Complete with serial killer neighbors," Christopher added. "And a mutant lunchbox of a car," Anita chimed in and took a sip. "And let's not forget the unstable electricity," Max concluded. "Huh?" The other three looked at him quizzically. "Come on. Why else would there be that big generator-looking thing in the garage?" Max made air quotes and almost dropped his bottle. The others thought about it for a moment before nodding. "To shitty electricity." The toasts grew progressively sillier and stranger as the evening went on, and before long they had toasted the Gulf Stream and its contribution to the climate of Northern Europe, maple syrup, Dumbledore's glorious beard. Maggie insisted that Richard Harris Dumbledore was far superior to Michael Gambon's, the fall of the Roman Empire, and last, but according to Christopher not least, the butt of the new psychology professor. The boys' competitive instincts quickly led them to trying to drink each other under the table, and eventually they both lost. Anita and Maggie didn't waste any time posing the two boys in what looked like a passionate embrace on the sofa and then taking several pictures. "For science, of course," Anita insisted. She squeezed in next to Maggie in the oversized chair on the opposite side of the coffee table. She swung her legs across Maggie's lap and giggled. "Oh, Chris is going to so be pissed," Maggie said with a chuckle. "But they look so cute," Anita said, a slight slur revealing how drunk she really was. "The only thing missing is a dress." "Huh?" Maggie looked at Anita. "Okay, shush." Anita put her finger to her lips in a drunkenly exaggerated display of telling Maggie to be quiet. "You can't tell anybody this." "Okay." "Not anybody." "Promise?" "Sure," Maggie agreed. "I mean it." "It's like super duper secret," Anita said emphatically. "This is like one of those non-disqualify thingies." Maggie raised her hand. "Scout's honor," she said seriously. "Oh. You are a Girl Scout?" "Not really," Maggie admitted. "But I buy their cookies." "Ooh, I want cookies now." "Do you have cookies?" Anita looked towards the kitchen. When Maggie shook her head, she pouted theatrically. "What was it you wanted to tell me?" "Something about a dress." Maggie reminded her. "Oh yeah. Now you can't tell anybody this," Anita repeated. Yeah. "I promise," Maggie said impatiently. Leaning closer, Anita whispered, "If Max is really annoying, I make him wear a dress." "Really?" Maggie looked at Anita, then at Max and the back at Anita again. "Yeah," she said with a snicker. "And I call him Maxine." "Oh, that's so sweet." Maggie giggled and drank the final sip of beer from her bottle. Maggie coughed and her last swallow of beer came out her nose. She wheezed and hiccuped as she fought for breath. Anita patted her back. "You what?" she finally managed to say as she tried to dry the beer and snot off Anita's legs. First, Anita waved her hands around mimicking something, "I tie him up." And then, she nodded firmly. "Then I fuck him senseless." Maggie just stared at Anita, suddenly seeing her friend in a whole new light. "But you can't tell anyone," she said with a drunken seriousness and wagging her finger at Maggie. "You promised." Anita snuggled closer. "Now you have to tell me what you and Chris do," she murmured conspiratorially. "It's like mutually assured destruction." Anita's drunken slur making the last words almost incomprehensible. "No way I'm telling her about the diapers." Maggie smiled awkwardly. "But we don't do anything like that," she finally said. "Really?" Anita sounded surprised and almost disappointed. "Sorry." "Oh. Don't be sorry. Anita stroked Maggie's cheek, her eyes quickly going more unfocused. You're real pretty, she slurred. If you were a guy, I'd put you in a dress and fuck you senseless too. Maggie smiled and took Anita's hand. And if you weren't so drunk, she whispered soothingly, I just might let you. I'm not drunk, Anita mumbled near incomprehensibly in protest. Shush. Of course you're not. Maggie gently stroked Anita's hair. Soon she was slumped against Maggie's shoulder, snoring softly. What a bunch of lightweights. Maggie slowly wriggled her way out from under Anita. She looked around the room at her sleeping friends before picking up the pizza boxes and a few of the empty bottles before unsteadily making her way to the kitchen. As she cleaned up, Maggie couldn't help thinking about the laptop that Charlotte had said was hidden under the floorboards in the basement. Her drunken buzz silenced the more sensible voice in the back of her mind that told her to wait until she was alone. Maggie silently sneaked towards the door to the basement and opened it. She cast a quick glance to the living room, but everybody there was still asleep. Then she flicked on the lights and went down the stairs. The basement smelled like dust and old books. Maggie looked at the floor next to the freezer, but couldn't see any secret hatch. Picking up a flashlight, she looked more closely, poking and prodding the floorboards until she found a small piece that was loose. Removing it revealed a finger-sized hole in the wood underneath. Maggie put a finger into the hole and easily lifted a small section of the floor up. In the small space underneath was a dusty nylon laptop bag. Maggie lifted it out and put it on the floor next to the hole before leaning down to see if there was anything else hidden under the floorboards. She found nothing but dust. At least there aren't any skeletons hidden under there. Maggie put the piece of floor back and brushed the dust off the laptop bag before carrying it up the stairs to the kitchen. She spread an old newspaper on the kitchen table before placing the laptop bag on top and unzipping it. Maggie wasn't quite sure what she expected from a 7-year-old laptop, but what she found was definitely not it. It was a small, cheap-looking laptop. The dark blue plastic casing had an unfamiliar silver logo and a strip of tape with CS written on it. Maggie opened it and saw nothing out of the ordinary. It had a small keyboard and a touchpad, just as expected. The only odd thing was the row of 3 USB ports just above the keyboard. Maggie held her breath, feeling almost like a kid on an adventure, and pressed the power button. Nothing happened. She pressed it again, but the screen remained dark and none of the indicator lights lit up. Maggie pressed several random buttons, hoping for a reaction, but the computer still did nothing. Then she realized that after 7 years, the battery was probably dead. She looked in the bag and brought out a charging cable and was about to plug it into the wall next to the table when she hesitated. If I leave it here to charge, the others might find it when they wake up. Maggie picked up the bag, charger and laptop and tiptoed upstairs. She plugged the computer into the wall next to the bed in the bedroom. A small red indicator started blinking. Maggie sat down in front of the laptop and tried turning it on again. The screen only said, charging, 0%. Estimated. 5 hours 21 minutes left. There were no signs of the computer booting up. As she watched that 0.0% change to 0.1%. Okay, this is going to take a while. Maggie closed the lid and sat down on the bed. She couldn't quite decide whether this was anticlimactic, or if it made her even more curious. Or maybe just tired. Maggie yawned and pulled a blanket around herself while she stared at the hypnotically blinking light. Maggie wasn't sure how long she sat before falling asleep, but when she woke up, it was light outside. The clouds were dark grey and looked heavy with rain. She could hear somebody moving around downstairs and stood. Still wrapped in the blanket, she walked down the stairs to see who else was awake. Anita was sitting by the kitchen table, nursing a big, steaming mug of coffee. She looked up when she heard Maggie and nodded weakly. You look like shit, Maggie said as she picked her favorite mug out of the cardboard box on the kitchen counter. I feel like shit, Anita said, taking another sip of coffee. Remind me to never mix that stuff with beer again. She pointed at the empty bottle of tequila on the kitchen counter. Maggie filled her mug with coffee and sat down next to Anita. For a while they just sat there silently, drinking their coffee. Did I do something stupid last night? Anita uneasily. I think I might have, but I'm not sure. It's all kinda hazy. Maggie couldn't help smiling. Well, you did say that you would have slept with me if I were a guy. Oh God, Anita groaned. Maggie's grin widened. I think your exact words were that you would fuck me senseless. Anita cringed and looked like she wanted to crawl inside her coffee cup and hide. Just as she took another sip, Maggie decided to go for the kill. Just like Maxine, she added. That got her the reaction she was expecting. Luckily, most of the sprayed coffee hit the newspaper still spread out on the table. Anita coughed and sputtered. What? How? She was red-faced and teary-eyed. Oh, don't worry. Maggie patted her hand. Your secret's safe with me. She winked conspiratorially and rose. And the next time you're staying over, just let me know if you need to borrow some extra rope. Anita just hid her furiously blushing face in her arms as Maggie started making breakfast. While Maggie made breakfast, the boys woke up. Christopher came to the kitchen and sat down at the table, bleary-eyed and quiet. Max just shuffled past the kitchen to the bathroom. Maggie wasn't sure, but she thought she could hear retching sounds almost being drowned out by the sound of the fan over the stove. Good morning, she said cheerfully as she cracked some eggs into the frying pan. Did you two sleep well? Christopher just gave Maggie a withering look in reply. Oh come on, she teased. You look so adorable there on the sofa. I'll show you the pictures later. You didn't. Maggie just grinned and Christopher let his head fall forward until his forehead rested against the table. Oh, go get cleaned up. I'm making you guys a proper breakfast. Anita left her mug on the table and slowly made her way up the stairs. A minute or two later, Maggie and Christopher could hear the shower start. You know, it's not funny, Christopher complained as Maggie looked through the cupboards for plates and putting them on the table. It's a little bit funny, Maggie replied and wrinkled her nose. Especially now, she added quietly. What? Christopher looked up from the cup of coffee Maggie put in front of him. Oh, nothing. After breakfast, and the appropriate amount of teasing and embarrassing photos, Anita, Max, and Christopher left. Maggie finished her coffee and then she retrieved the laptop from her bedroom. She put it on the kitchen table and pressed the power button. The screen lit up with what looked like a bunch of system checks. One by one they finished and when the final one flashed a green OK, the words "Insert key to continue" appeared. I guess that's the thumb drive, Maggie said to the empty room. She pulled the 2 thumb drives out of a pocket on her backpack and plugged the second one into the computer. There was a beep and words on the screen changed to reading, and then to connecting. Connecting to what? The screen flickered and the text was replaced with the image of a room filled with bookshelves. The floor was covered by a deep red carpet and in a corner was an unlit fireplace. Sitting in one of the old-fashioned wing chairs was a young Charlotte wearing a baggy tracksuit and reading a book. Call screensaver. I wonder where it is. Just then, Charlotte put down the book and looked right at the camera. Well, it certainly took you long enough, she said. Maggie just stared at the screen, waiting for whatever would come next. Finally, Charlotte rose from the chair and walked towards the camera. Geez, she said. I thought I had the volume fixed. She held up a finger and bent down towards something below the camera. Next she held up a piece of paper saying, "Turn up the volume." Charlotte mimed talking and waving her hands between her mouth and ears. Stupid volume controls, she grumbled. I know I should have fixed them myself. Maggie chuckled. Oh, so you can hear me? Charlotte asked suddenly, startling Maggie a little. Well, don't just sit there like an idiot. Hello. Charlotte tapped a finger on the lens. You know it's really rude to just ignore me like that. After a few moments of hesitation, Charlotte sighed. Fine. Baby steps it is. She took a few steps away from the camera until she was standing in the middle of the room. This, Charlotte gestured around herself, is not a recording. It's live. Just as live as you sitting in my kitchen, well, yours now, wearing a t-shirt with a. Move your arms. I can't see properly. Without thinking about it, Maggie moved her arms. Thanks. With a Superman logo on. Supergirl, Maggie corrected without thinking about it. Fine, Supergirl logo then, Charlotte said. Wait, what? How can you see that? Duh. Charlotte rolled her eyes. Webcam. I mean, this isn't a video. Finally it sinks in. Charlotte sighed exasperatedly. No. Like I said. This isn't a video. It's live. Well, sort of. But they said you were, you know, dead. Maggie's head reeled and had trouble finding the right words. Yeah. And old too. Although I don't look too bad for a 70-year-old, do I? How? Look, it's easier to show you. Bring the laptop downstairs to the basement. Maggie picked up the computer and carried it down the stairs. Now what? She asked, looking around. Press Shift, Alt and Home at the same time, then type in 663, Carlotta said. Maggie put the computer on top of the freezer and pressed the buttons. A small window opened on the screen and she entered the numbers. There was a loud thunk and the freezer rose a little and swiveled to the side to reveal a metal hatch in the floor. As Maggie watched, it silently opened and lights flickered on, illuminating a narrow metal staircase going down. And down we go, Charlotte said cheerfully. Maggie made her way down the stairs. At the bottom, she could see two doors. One of them silently slid open. Go on, you're going to get a kick out of this. The room on the other side of the door was warm and when the lights flickered on, Maggie saw a white, tiled floor and plain white walls. There was a waist-high platform covered with the same tiles as the floor in one corner and in the middle of the room a softly glowing sphere the size of a tennis ball hung in mid-air. Maggie reached out to touch the ball. It was a bizarre sensation. She could feel her fingers hitting something, but she couldn't feel any surface or temperature or anything else. It was like the ball both was, and wasn't there at the same time. What the hell is it? Maggie backed away from the sphere. I honestly don't know. I know what it does though. And that is. In layman's terms, it bends the laws of physics. What do you mean? It makes things that shouldn't normally be possible. It sort of sucks up the normal around it. It seriously skews the odds in your favor. Roll a die and it'll roll a 6 1/6 of the time. Not here. I tried it. I got 37 sixes in a row. Twice. Do you know the odds of that happening? Pretty astronomical. Exactly. So the old transhumanist pipe dream of uploading a brain to a computer. It actually worked. Okay, so your brain is in this computer. Maggie tapped the laptop. Don't be silly, Charlotte replied and laughed. There's a mainframe in the other room down here. The laptop is just to make it easier to talk to you. Maggie backed out of the room. This is Nobel Prize level stuff, she said. Why hide it? Charlotte shrugged. Several reasons. First, I'm just an old crackpot. Second, it's impossible to measure this thing. Every instrument I've tried insists that it's not there. And third, would you trust the governments of the world with this? She raised her eyebrows. I see your point, Maggie admitted. So, what's this all about? Charlotte looked around her virtual library awkwardly. Yeah, about that. I was kind of hoping you'd go along with something a little, well, strange. Stranger than having a brain trapped in a computer in a hidden basement under my freezer. Maggie asked with a smirk. Okay, that's a fair point, Charlotte admitted. Anyway, I was hoping you wouldn't mind having a roommate. Other than you living in a computer in the basement, you mean? Kind of. You'd be able to see me and talk to me without the laptop. And how do we do that? Do I have to wear like those big VR goggles? Not quite. All you have to do is take a pill. A pill? Look over on the table. Charlotte said. On the platform was a small, white plastic box that Maggie hadn't noticed before. She put the laptop down and opened the box. Inside was a red pill and a blue pill. Maggie rolled her eyes. You saw the Matrix, didn't you? On the screen, Charlotte grinned impishly. Come on, can you blame me, she said. So let me guess. You want me to take the red pill? Yep. Charlotte snapped her fingers and a pair of mirrored sunglasses appeared. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Meaning? You know what nanobots are, right? Oh yeah, they're like transformers that turn into little insects. Precisely, and they dash. Charlotte stopped abruptly as Maggie's answer registered. No. They're not transformers. They're microscopic robots that dash. I'm kidding, Maggie interrupted. I know what nanets are. I read science fiction. Charlotte sighed. Anyway, it contains a bunch of nanets that basically tweak your sensory system so it can pick up signals from the little transmitters all over the house. So I'll see you even if you're not really there? Sounds a bit weird. Maggie picked up the blue pill and examined it. And this one? Charlotte took off the sunglasses again. It reverses the effect of the red pill. And this is all safe, right? Perfectly safe. Anywhere else, it probably wouldn't even work, but the normal sucker. Maggie nodded. Throwing caution to the wind, Maggie popped the red pill in her mouth and swallowed. Oh, the pill also contains an extremely fast-acting sedative, so you probably want to lie down. Sedative? Why? We're rewriting your sensory system. Being unconscious is probably a good idea. Good point, Maggie said. The world was already beginning to go a little fuzzy along the edges and her knees felt a little wobbly. She crawled onto the platform and closed her eyes. The first thing Maggie noticed when she woke up was the sound of rain. It reminded her of autumn days when she was a girl. She would hide under her desk in her little fortress to read or play video games. The next thing she noticed was not quite as pleasant as those memories. She had wet herself. And it wasn't just a little slip-up, it was a first night back after Liza's complete flooding. Damn it, Maggie groaned. She tried to sit up, but her entire body felt like it was made of lead. Don't try to get up. Maggie turned towards the voice and saw it was coming from the laptop. I'm wet, Maggie whispered, feeling a rush of shame at her loss of control. Yes, I know. Charlotte looked everywhere except the camera. Why? It's been weeks since. Yeah, about that. The nanets didn't work. Charlotte gave an embarrassed chuckle. I guess 38 sixes was just one too many. But don't worry. It should be easily fixable. So it's not because of, Maggie paused. Eliza. Charlotte shook her head. I doubt it. You weren't there long enough to have any long-term effects. I needed diapers at night for more than a week afterwards, Maggie pointed out. Charlotte leaned closer to the camera and whispered, 24/7, for 41 years. So you can fix this? Oh yeah. Charlotte waved her hand dismissively. It'll just take me a little time to reprogram the little buggers. I guess we're going to have to use goggles. At least for now. Do you have any lying around? Charlotte shook her head. No, but I ordered some online while you were out. They should be here the day after tomorrow. Charlotte sat back down in her chair. In the meantime, you should probably get changed. Yeah. Maggie scooted to the edge of the platform and carefully slid off, standing on wobbly legs. What about the mess here? She asked and nodded towards the small puddle on the platform. Don't worry about it. I have a couple of souped-up Roombas that handle cleaning down here. They're way more thorough than I ever was. Maggie picked up the laptop and walked bow-legged up the stairs. When she arrived in her bedroom and put the laptop down, she was a little startled to see that the library had changed into a copy of her bedroom, complete with a translucent copy of herself holding the laptop. What? Maggie started. I said there were transmitters and cameras all over the house, she explained. Okay, but if this is going to work, we need to have some ground rules. Maggie bent down to rummage through the box where she had what was left of the package of diapers she had had to buy after returning from Eliza's house. First, this is my room. You can't just be in here uninvited. Maggie found what she was looking for and pulled a diaper out of the plastic bag before putting the rest next to her bed. And that includes peeking. Maggie could have sworn that Charlotte looked disappointed that she remembered that. Oh, and that goes for the bathroom too, Maggie added before closing the lid of the laptop. After a quick shower, Maggie put on the diaper and wrapped herself in a bathrobe before walking back down to the basement to put her clothes in the washing machine. The machine was easy enough to figure out, so Maggie threw in some extra laundry to fill it up and turned it on. Going back upstairs, she opened the laptop again and found Charlotte lounging on the living room sofa reading a book. Feel better? Charlotte asked. I guess, Maggie said. She sat down at the other end of the sofa and jumped a little at the unfamiliar sensation of extra padding on her butt. It took her a little extra fidgeting before she was comfortable. She looked at the screen and then at the empty seat on the sofa that wasn't empty on the screen. Okay, considering I have a brain in a computer and a normal sucker in a hidden lab under my freezer, and my entire house is more or less going to be the holodeck from Star Trek, I just have to ask, the car. What's up with the car? My little, green Isetta. Nice, isn't it? Charlotte smiled. Is it a flying car? Please tell me it flies. Sorry. But it does get great mileage. Maggie sighed with disappointment. Then she felt a sudden rush of worry as she thought she had wet herself again, but after discreetly checking she found that it was a false alarm. So, any more rules? Charlotte asked when she saw she had Maggie's attention again. I'm guessing you can control things like lights and stuff like that, right? Charlotte nodded. Okay, no messing with any guests I might have. So no playing ghost. Unless you say it's okay. Charlotte smiled mischievously. Yeah, I guess. Well, that all sounds reasonable, so I guess we have a deal. Charlotte lay down, her head on Maggie's lap. Now, I know you said that your bedroom was private, but what if Mr. Bear has a nightmare? A worn teddy bear appeared in Charlotte's hands. Can we come sleep in your bed with you then? Charlotte turned to look at the camera with big puppy eyes and for a moment, Maggie saw the scared little girl she had met at Eliza's house. Oh man, that place really fucked her up. She wanted to pull Charlotte onto her lap, wrap her arms around her and comfort her. Of course, Charlie. Thank you, Charlotte whispered and snuggled closer to the virtual Maggie. Maggie smiled and tried to make her copy stroke Charlotte's hair. She thought she could almost feel the weight of Charlotte's head on her lap.
Double Trouble. Neither myself nor my brother could believe this was happening as our mother opened the double doors of our wardrobe to reveal a resplendent display of skirts, blouses and dresses. "You honestly don't expect us to wear those, do you?" Peter asked. "Well, after you two have had a bath, you won't have any choice in the matter," she replied. "If you want to wear your boy clothes, you'll have to earn them," she stated as she divided the rail full of girly clothes and removed one of the gingham dresses the girls all wore. "Otherwise you'll both be going to school tomorrow wearing this." "You're joking, right?" I said. "There's no way we'd be allowed to go to school dressed as girls." "Do I look like I'm joking?" Mum asked. "And for your information, it was your teacher Mrs. Brown who suggested petticoating." "Pettiwatting?" Peter sneered. "Petticoating," Mum replied. "If you haven't worked it out, it means dressing naughty boys in girls' clothes until they can behave themselves," she explained. "Now, why don't you two jump in the bath before you get ready for bed?" "Bed," we protested in unison. "It's only 5:30. And by the time you've had your bath it'll be 6 o'clock, and 6 o'clock is the time you get ready for bed," Mum stated, before smiling wryly. "Don't look so worried, boys, bedtime isn't till 8. She said. "Now come on, bathroom," she said as she began to shepherd us onto the landing. I was planning on legging it down the stairs and, providing the front door was unlocked, to the street outside. But since my grandmother stood on the landing effectively blocking my path, I went into the bathroom, followed by my brother Peter. The bath was already full of fragrant bubbles. Of course we begged and pleaded and promised we'd be good as we slowly peeled off our clothes. I can't speak for my brother, but part of me was certain it was all pretense. Surely dressing boys as girls is child abuse. I thought as my grandmother scrubbed me clean with a big pink sponge. Mum did the same to Peter. We weren't strangers to sharing a bath, but being scrubbed like little kids was less than desirable. After shampooing and rinsing our hair, we were ejected from the tub and mercilessly towel dried. "What's this for?" I said as we coughed and spluttered a fine white talcum powder out of our mouths. "It makes your skin feel nice and soft," Mum said as she dabbed my body with the fluffy pink applicator. "Like the skin of a princess." "It stinks." Peter moaned as Granny covered him in talcum powder too. "Well, we can't have our princesses smelling like boys, can we?" Granny said. Soon, we were being marched naked into our bedroom. It was like seeing it for the first time all over again. The mural of the fairy tale castle on the wall was by far the best bit, mostly because it wasn't pink with pictures of the Disney princesses all over it, unlike our pillowcases and duvet covers. "Now there's a nappy and a nightie under your pillows," Mum said. "What?" I yelped. "Even girls don't wear nappies." "No, but petticoated boys do," Mum replied. "Now I bought you both pull-on ones because you're not babies, but if you act like babies, we'll just have to put you in a proper baby's nappy instead." With the threat of being put in a nappy like a baby, and the fear of going to school dressed as girls, Peter and I reluctantly lifted our pillows to find a pull-on nappy, a pair of rubber knickers, a pair of cotton overknickers and a white frilly nightie each. Peter started to cry as he pulled on the frilly white overknickers. I completely empathized with him, but there was no way I'd let them see me crying like a baby, or a girl for that matter. Under our beds was a pair of fluffy slippers each, and wearing these we were marched down to the sitting room, where we were told to sit quietly and watch the TV. "Where's the remote?" I asked. "Princesses don't choose what they watch what they're told," Mother stated. After the tedium of songs of praise had finished, Granny said she was going home. "Now, do you need me in the morning to help get these two ready for school?" she said to our mother. "I shouldn't think so," Mum replied as she cast her eyes over us. "So far they've earned their normal uniforms, but I'll give you a call if they start acting up." "Very well." Granny smiled. "Now, what about my two princesses give their granny a kiss goodnight?" Peter and I sheepishly stood up and gave Granny's wrinkly old cheek a kiss. She left and we sat back on the sofa. "How long do you think we have to do this for?" Peter asked as Mum waved our grandmother off. Dunno. I replied. You won't tell anyone, will you? I fearfully asked. He shook his head. And I know you won't, he knowingly replied as our mother returned. The TV anchor man announced that the next program would be the film, The Living Daylights, starring Timothy Dalton as James Bond. Can we watch this, Mum? I asked as the BABA Baum music started. Oh no. Mother replied. Princesses don't like James Bond. How about a DVD instead? Okay. I replied. Can I choose? Peter asked. It's my turn. How's about Mummy chooses? Mum suggested as she turned on the DVD player and browsed our small collection. This one looks nice, she said as she opened a case and removed the disc. What is it? Peter asked in a most half-hearted tone of voice. Mum muttered as she closed the DVD tray, then the case. Enchanted Tales, she said, showing us the cover. It was a Disney Princess DVD. I guess she bought it especially since it matched our new bedroom. I suggested I'd rather go to bed. It's barely 7 o'clock, Paul. Mum replied. A princess can have too much beauty sleep, you know, she said in her most patronizing tone, and this will give you sweet dreams, she said as she pressed play. A few very long minutes later, Peter got up. Where are you going? Mum asked. Toilet, he replied. I felt I needed a wee too, but had a feeling the toilet would be out of bounds. Oh no, you're not. Mum said as she stood up to block his exit. You've got your nappy on. And you don't want to miss any of the film, do you? But. Peter yelped. After a bit of moaning, Peter sat back down. Being desperate for a wee was also a good distraction from the bog-awful princess story we sat watching. Eventually I had to let go, which was as humiliating as it was a relief. Now what do I do? I wondered. Do I tell Mum I've wet my nappy and need a new one, or just sit here in its warmth? I decided to focus on the film. Oh Mum, we moaned when she stopped the DVD bang on 8 o'clock. That had almost finished. I said. Well, if you're good girls you can watch it again before bedtime tomorrow, she said. Oh, don't call us girls. Peter moaned. Sorry, princesses, Mum replied. If you're good little princesses and go straight to bed, I'll let you watch it again tomorrow. I don't wanna watch that ever again. Peter said defiantly. Mum ignored him. Now, do either of you need a clean nappy before bed? I didn't reply. Neither did my brother. But our faces must have said it all. Mum took us to the bathroom where we removed our nighties and hung them neatly on the radiator, then our over knickers and rubber knickers. Mum told us where the perforations were and we ripped them apart and placed the nappy, along with the rubber knickers, in a lidded bucket. Then Mum showed us how to clean ourselves with baby wipes, how to apply our own dusting of talc, before showing us where our nappies were kept. We both moaned that we neither wanted to, nor needed to wear nappies for bed, but Mum was adamant we wore them regardless. She reinforced this by showing us a massive pink nappy. If you don't want to wear your pull-ups, I'll put you in one of these, she said, before explaining that unlike our pull-up nappies, this one isn't disposable. Which means it needs to be washed in the morning to make sure it's clean and dry ready for tomorrow night, she said. And believe me boys, I won't be washing it for you. In light of that, the pull-up nappies didn't seem so bad. Once we had a clean pair of rubbers and our over knickers and nighties back on, Mum said, oh look at the time, it's almost 20 minutes past your bedtime, before shuffling us out of the bathroom. It felt so weird having the light flowing nightie waft around my legs. It was nice and warm after being on the radiator though. Mum made a point of locking the bathroom door. Now, you've got to make sure your nighties are nice and straight when you get into bed. You don't want them all scrunched up around your waist, she said as if talking to a couple of toddlers. I gulped as Mum tucked my brother into bed, then turned towards me. I'm 9 for ********************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************** Now I want to make it clear, boys. If either of you take off your nightie or nappy before I say so, you'll both be going to school in your new uniforms, she said, looking at each of us in turn. In fact, she added as she stood up. With an air of determination, she strides to the wardrobe and pulled its doors wide open. I'll get them out ready because I have a feeling you don't believe me, she explained as she hung the two identical gingham school dresses from the picture rail opposite our beads. I gulped as Mum spent a moment admiring them. Girls' uniforms are so much nicer than boys' uniforms, Mum said as she turned to us and smiled wryly. Don't you think, she added. I gulped. I'm not sure how my brother replied. Now I don't want you two up all night talking, she said as she turned on a lamp. My princesses need their beauty sleep, she said in a teasing, taunting tone of voice. Nighty-night girls, and sweet dreams, were her parting words. Although she did pause to admire the brace of gingham school dresses before turning out the light and leaving. The lamp she'd turned on is a new one, and I don't like it. It's too bright for a start, and has a revolving shade that casts a pink and lilac glow across the walls and ceiling. At least it's not princesses, I said as I followed a silhouette of Tinker Bell scroll across the wall. This is all your fault, Peter said. I gulped, turned onto my side and wished with all my heart that I'd wake up and it would all have been a dream. I fell asleep to the sound of my twin brother quietly sobbing. No sooner had I fallen to sleep I woke up. It was early, but I wasn't sure how early. I looked at the window. It was daylight. My nightie had scrunched up to my waist, which meant it really wasn't a dream. I straightened it out as best I could. I hadn't noticed the curtains last night. They were much thinner than our old ones, and like our bedding they too have the Disney princess all over them. I felt guilty for feeling kind of nice waking up wearing a slinky slidey nightie, under an equally slidey duvet cover. After a while of dwelling in my silky bliss, I began to feel an urge. This brought the sudden realization that I was also wearing a nappy, and that the bathroom door was locked. I hung on for as long as I could, but eventually had to let go. It was weird. After the initial flood had lost its warmth, it felt strangely dry down there. Full, yet dry. Eventually my brother woke up. What time is it? He groaned when he noticed I was awake. Dunno, we haven't got a clock anymore, I replied. Do you think Mum'll make go to school wearing those? He asked as he stared at the two school dresses hanging opposite our beds. Not if we're good, I gulped. I imagined the shame I'd experience, entering the bustling schoolyard wearing his girl's uniform and everyone pointing and laughing at me. I buried my head beneath my duvet and longed for another reality, but all I could think about was the prospect of having to wear girls' clothes both in and out of school. A short while later, Mum entered and said, "Good morning, girls. I hope you've have a nice sleep," in an altogether too chirpier tone as she opened the curtains and flooded the room with light. She made us wear our nighties whilst we ate breakfast, then announced it was time to get ready for school. Peter asked if we had to dress as girls. Well, since you've both been good girls, so far, she said, looking at each of us sternly. I'll let you go to school as boys today, she replied, emphasizing today. This was a great relief for my brother. I however knew she wouldn't really make us go to school dressed as girls. As we'd done at bedtime, we removed our nappies and dumped them in the bucket. Then Mum told us to put our knickers on, before coming to her room. They're in your top drawer, she said. Of course we protested, but the threat of going to school in gingham dresses swiftly assured our compliance. Between our beds was a chest of drawers, and on opening the top drawer we found a host of frilly knickers. To add insult to injury, those on my side of the drawer had my name embroidered on them, and Peter's all had Peter embroidered on the front. There's no question about who they belong to, I thought as I picked up the top pair. Are they all pink? I said. Looks like it, Peter replied. Better than a dress though, he said as he stepped into a pair. Wearing only our knickers, we went to my mother's bedroom where she gave us our normal school pants and sweatshirts. Now you're not to get dirty, boys, she said. Otherwise you'll have to wear your other uniforms tomorrow. Okay, we moaned in unison. Oh, and before you go downstairs, Mum said as we shuffled out of her room, can you both put a clean nappy and a pair of rubbers under your pillows ready for tonight? Before long, we found ourselves walking to school. On the surface, it was much the same as any other school day, but we were both unusually quiet. Although I was dressed as a boy, I couldn't help but feel just a little bit girly. My knickers fit me snugly and their stretchy slidey fabric felt very different to my Y fronts. They may be out of sight, but they're certainly not out of mind. It wouldn't be so bad if we didn't have to wear nappies, I said, breaking the silence. It wouldn't be so bad if we didn't have to dress like girls, full stop. Peter replied. I'm sure my knickers are too small. I think they're supposed to be, I said. Do you think Mrs. Brown really did suggest it? Dunno, I replied as we neared the school gates. Good morning, Peter, Paul, our teacher said as we entered the classroom. How are you two today? Okay, we moaned. She took the register, then asked Peter and I to stay behind after the bell had rang. We glanced at each other and gulped. Eventually the bell rang. All the other kids filtered out whilst Peter and I made our way to Mrs. Brown's desk. She made sure the door was closed before knowingly asking, did you two have a nice surprise yesterday? I gulped. Peter shuffled nervously. It wasn't nice, I said. It's horrible. Well, I'm sure it won't feel quite so horrible after a while, she said. Most boys I've had petticoated soon get into the swing of things. And you never know, you might even enjoy it. I don't think so. Peter spat. Careful, Peter. Mrs. Brown warned, any backchat, cheek or bad behavior of any sort will guarantee your classmates will have a nice surprise tomorrow, she said to both of us. Now, unless you want to come to school dressed as girls, I suggest you both remain on your best behavior for the foreseeable future. Do you understand? We nodded and sulked, then when prompted, murmured yes, Mrs. Brown. Now run along, boys. And do try to be good girls. I wish they'd stop calling us girls, Peter said as we made our way to Mr. Walker's class. Well, we are wearing knickers, I replied, just as quietly as he'd asked. Their firm silky hold on me was ever present. That doesn't make us girls though, he whispered. I know, I replied. But they make me feel like one, I thought. We remained on our best behavior all day long. Even at playtime and throughout lunch, we didn't play football or bulldog or tig with the other kids for fear of falling over and getting dirty. I couldn't help but pay particular attention to the girls and their uniforms. If we did wear ours for school, would we have knee socks or ankle socks? Would we wear our own shoes or girls' shoes? Some of the girls wore a cardigan instead of a sweatshirt. Which would we have? Do you reckon we'll have to dress as girls when we get home? Peter asked. I hope not, I replied. I want to play out. Me too. When we got home, Mum asked us if we'd had a nice day, and whether we'd been good or not. We moaned a yes to both questions. Well, let's get you out of those boring boy clothes, she said. She took us up to her bedroom, where our boy clothes were taken from us and locked in her ottoman. Stood in only our knickers, Mum said we could go and choose a dress to wear. But I wanted to play out, I said. Johnny and Mackie are down the swings. Well, in that case you might prefer a playsuit to instead of a dress. What's a playsuit? I'll show you, Mum smiled. We followed her to our wardrobe, wearing only our frilly pink knickers, but hiding them as best we could with our hands. Mum routed through the frocks and skirts before she found what she was looking for. This is a playsuit, she said as she removed an item and showed it to us. I'm not playing out in that, I insisted. Mum pointed out that it is in fact a pair of shorts and a top all in one, so nobody will see your knickers if you play on the climbing frame. But they'll still laugh at me. You don't know that, Mother replied. They might say you look nice. No, they won't. Are you playing out too, Peter? Not if I have to dress like a girl, he replied. Me neither, I stated. Are you sure? Mum asked. I thought you want to play out with your friends. I'd rather stay in if I have to wear any of that stuff, I said. Well, seeing as you're both staying in, how's about wearing something really pretty? She grinned. It's all really pretty, Peter sneered. I'm glad you think so, Peter, Mum replied. Why don't you choose today, and Paul can choose tomorrow? Not surprisingly, Peter refused to choose, until Mother said, well, in that case, I'll choose for you, and I'll tell you now, you'll be wearing a nice pink one. The only problem is, which pink one? You've got so many. Okay. I'll choose, Peter said. He settled for one of the blue ones, the only one that didn't have a big bow on the front. Having bought us two of everything, Mum placed one on my bed and one on Peter's. Now, would you like socks or tights? Socks, he replied. They're in the second drawer down, Mum said. We opened the drawer to find a host of socks and tights. We complained that they were all girls' socks. Mum asked us what we expected. We pulled on a pair of horrible white knee socks with flowery pastons running up them, then Mum told us to put on a vest from our knicker drawer. And make sure it matches your knickers, Mum insisted. We stepped into our dresses. Mum turned Peter around and began fastening the buttons that ran all the way up the back. Then she stopped. Why I'm doing this when your brother could be helping you, I have no idea, she said. She sat on my bed and let me fiddle with Peter's buttons. Then I turned around and Peter fastened my buttons. Oh, you look so sweet helping each other, she gushed. Under our beds was a pair of girls' shoes we never knew we had. They had fiddly buckles and a little heel. We complained that they were uncomfortable and hard to walk in. Mum said we'd get used to them. And the important thing is they look nice, she added. Mum insisted on taking a photograph of us so she could show Granny how nice we look. To add insult to injury, she made us stand in the back garden and hold hands. We ran back indoors as soon as we could, fearful that one of the neighbors might see us. We sat in front of the TV and watched what Mum wanted. She BBs, the CBBC sister channel aimed at girls. It's the last channel any boy would choose to watch. In fact, it's too girly for most girls. I don't know why, but I felt obliged to ask if I could go to the toilet. First Mum insisted I say Mummy instead of Mum, then she told me that I had to sit down to wee. That way you won't get any on your dress, she said with a smile. And make sure it doesn't get tucked in when you pull your knickers up, she added as I clumped my way up the stairs. It was weird sitting down to wee, but not as weird as the fact I could reach the floor with my heels on. Mum made a point of checking my dress for splashes when I returned. When we ate supper, she made us each wear a white apron. Alice's in Wonderland, she called us. I could see where she was coming from. After supper, Mother had us wash and dry the dishes, then the doorbell rang, and since I wasn't wearing the marigolds, I had to answer the door. Hello, Paul, said Mrs. Brown, grinning from ear to ear and trying to see around the door behind which I hid. Don't be shy. I'm sure you look very nice, she said as she entered. I tried as best I could to keep the front door between myself and her, but once she was inside, my shield was rendered useless. I closed the door and hung my head. You look like Alice, Mrs. Brown said as she looked me up and down, black Mary Janes, white knee socks, blue dress, white apron, and topping it off, my very boyish head. Hello, Mrs. Brown, Mum said as she entered the kitchen. Hello, she replied. Peter looks like Alice too, she said. Don't they both look gorgeous? Mum said proudly. They look absolutely delightful, our teacher said. Why she was in our home I have no idea. Mum told me to stop loitering and to get on with drying the dishes, before offering Mrs. Brown a cup of tea. They sat at the table and talked about us. It's amazing how much they've changed after only one day, Mum said. Boys do find it easier to behave when they're dressed nicely. Mrs. Brown replied. If I had my way, every boy in my class would be petticoated. When we'd finished the dishes, Mum said we could take our aprons off. They fastened with 3 buttons on the back between our shoulders, and a bow at the waist. After I'd unfastened Peter's buttons, he unfastened mine. Isn't it sweet how they help each other? Mum said. Now hang your aprons up nicely, boys, and show Mrs. Brown your dresses. I plucked up the courage to ask why our teacher was here, in our home. Because Granny's at Bridge Club tonight, so Mrs. Brown has kindly volunteered to help with your bath. Mum replied. But we had a bath yesterday. Peter moaned. Princesses have a bath every day. Mother said. Now why don't you two go and watch TV for a while? Peter and filtered to the lounge, leaving our mother and Mrs. Brown alone. She Beebe's was still on and neither of us dare change the channel. Why is she here? Peter asked. Dunno. I gulped. But I reckon if we don't do as we're told, everybody at school will know. I think they're bluffing about us going to school dressed as girls. Peter whispered. But we already have the girls' uniform, and even if we don't wear them, Mum has that photograph she took for Granny. Half an hour or so later, Mum told us it was bath time. I followed Mum up the stairs. Peter followed me and Mrs. Brown followed him. Our teacher gushed over how nice our new bedroom is and how lucky we were. Neither of us dare offer our honest opinion. First, I unbuttoned Peter's dress, then he undid mine. Stripping down to our pink knickers in front of our teacher was a shameful task, but nowhere near as shameful as the prospect of going to school dressed as girls would be. In the bathroom, Mum scrubbed me whilst Mrs. Brown scrubbed Peter, and once out of the bath, Mum gave us a fluffy pad each so we could apply our own talcum powder, and each other's. We kept our bits covered with our hands as we trotted back to our bedroom. Mum and Mrs. Brown followed. You don't have to watch us get ready for bed, I said as they loitered. Oh, but we do, Paul. Mum replied. Come on, everything should be under your pillows. Do I have to wear this? Peter sulked. Of course you do. Mum replied. All petticoated boys wear nappies for bed. Mrs. Brown added. And some of them wear them for school too, if they're very naughty. We reluctantly pulled on our nappies, followed by the rubber knickers, then our cotton over knickers, and finally, we pulled our nighties over our heads. Mum made us say thank you to Mrs. Brown for helping, and she left. We watched girly TV until 8 p.m. Peter said he didn't need a clean nappy. I did. I felt more ashamed than ever as we entered our classroom for following morning. Mrs. Brown cast us a knowing smile as we took our seats. Not only had she seen us wearing dresses, she'd also seen us naked, and wearing nappies and nighties. The same routine went on for the rest of the week, only Granny helped us with our nightly bath from Tuesday to Friday. We took it in turns choosing which frock we wore after school, but weren't allowed to choose one we'd already worn. On Saturday morning, Mum said we were allowed to bath ourselves, but as it was the weekend, she'd choose our dresses, and she chose the prettiest and frilliest monstrosities we had. On Monday after school, it was a relief to be able to choose our own dresses again. Over the following weeks, we simply got used to being girls at home and boys at school. Even if we did wear knickers beneath our school pants, it just became the new normal. Even all the girly programs on She Beebies weren't that bad, apart from the Cindy Princess cartoon show, that was dreadful, from the jerky animation and squeaky voices to the watered-down reworkings of classic fairy tales. We've spent a lot of time at our grandmother's house over the weekends. She has a big garden with high walls and no one can see in. We play croquet and swing ball, hopscotch and balloon volleyball. We're also learning how to skip with a rope, and to play those clapping games. Yes, they're a bit girly, but at least we're not being given dolls and prams to play with. Mum continued to encourage us to play out with our friends but without the option of boy clothes. We only see them at school where our petticoated state is unknown to all but our teacher, Mrs. Brown. However, our secret life was shattered in the first week of the summer holidays. Peter and I were sat in our bedroom practicing a clapping game to the rhyme of A Sailor Went to Sea, sea, sea. We wore lilac dresses with little pink bows printed all over the fabric, and a wide pink sash that tied in a bow at the back. Unbeknown to us, John, Michael and Stephen came knocking, and instead of sending them away, Mum sent them all up to our bedroom. As soon as they saw us in our princess bedroom, sat on our pink bedspreads, wearing pretty dresses, thin white tights and girls' shoes, they fell about laughing, calling us sissies, puffs and girls. On hearing the commotion, Mum came up to our room and said, "Now boys, if you can't be nice to Peter and Paul, then you're not welcome." "But, they're dressed like girls." Stephen spat. "Yes they are, and they're far better behaved because of it." Mum replied. "Now are you going to say sorry?" "No," all three replied. "Well, in that case you'd better leave, and I'll be telling your mothers how horrible you've all been when I see them," Mum stated before ushering them out of our bedroom. Peter and I were speechless. We just sat on our beds and stared at each other before hanging our heads. Mum returned and said, "What horrible boys they are." "Why did you let them in?" I asked. "Because they called for you," Mum replied. If anyone will benefit from a dose of petticoating, it's those three, and I'll be telling their mothers as much when I see them. But we didn't want them to know. And now they do, Mum replied. If they were proper friends they wouldn't have teased you like they did. Yes they would, Peter barked. Look at us. We are sissies. No you're not, you two very well behaved and very pretty boys, Mum stated. You're my perfect princesses, she smiled. Now, who'd like a choc ice? Me please, we said mournfully in unison. Well come on then, Mum said with a smile, as if that would cure all ills. Mum always insisted we wore our aprons when eating, so we did each other's buttons before being given a choc ice each. Why don't you eat them in the garden? It's a lovely day. But someone might see us, I replied. Well, that hardly matters now, does it? Mum replied, plus, you two princesses are far too pretty to be cooped up indoors all day. Mum wouldn't take no for an answer, so we sauntered into the garden and nervously glanced up at the overlooking windows before sitting on the bench. I hate being a princess, Peter said. It was okay so long as no one knew, I replied. Now everyone's going to know. 6 weeks later, my brother and I wore boy clothes for the first time since we broke up for summer. Mrs. Brown asked us if we'd had a nice summer when we returned to school. Yes, miss, we replied as the other kids cast us peculiar looks, whispered to one another and giggled. We took our seats and waited for the rest of the class to arrive before Mrs. Brown took the register. Clearly we weren't being altogether honest when we said we'd had a nice summer. Good morning, girls, Mrs. Brown said as 3 more pupils entered the classroom. A host of giggles and goshes erupted as John, Michael and Stephen entered, each wearing the girls' uniform. Peter and I couldn't believe it. Neither could most of the other children. Mrs. Brown stood all 3 of them at the front of the class, and explained why they're dressed as girls. Since they've proved they cannot be good boys, we're going to see if John, Michael and Stephen can be good girls instead, she said, before making it clear that if any of the boys tease them, they'll find themselves in exactly the same predicament. Now John, if you'll go and sit with Cassie. Peter with Joanna and Stephen with Vanessa, they'll be your chaperones, so stick with them and do exactly as they tell you.